Hello, welcome back. Let's read another PDF. But I start to get tired. It's 6 p.m. I did download this. I have a new read list. So that was the Windows 9X, and I did find this architecture of Windows 9X. Next is Windows ME. Then I did start to do some DOS, MS-DOS, operating systems, timeline of DOS, list of DOS commands. So maybe do that, but we should do the Windows ME Vista, Windows 7 and 8 stuff I have here, but I start to get tired, but still have power on the camcorder. This is only 7 pages, and this is 13 pages. I think we should try to do this and this later, but let's get started. We could maybe do it in one part video.
Architecture of Windows 9X. The Windows 95 architecture. The Windows 9X series of operating systems refers to the kernel which lies at the heart of Windows 9X. Its architecture is monolithic. The basic code is similar in function to MS-DOS. As a 16/32-bit hybrid, it requires support from DOS to operate. Contents. Critical files. Boot sequence. Phase 1, the ROM BIOS bootstrap process. Phase 2, the master boot record and boot sector. Phase 3, IO.system file initialization. Phase 4, config.system and real mode configuration. Phase 5, initialize drivers. Phase 6, Win32 initialization. Kernel. See also. References. Further reading. External links. Critical files. Windows 95 boots using the following set of files: SAD Smiley 1, 32-bit shell and command line interpreter, shell.dll and shell32.dll shell API. Explorer.exe, Windows shell and file manager. Command.com, command line shell executable. Windows 95 core kernel 32.dll and krnl386.exe. Windows API for Windows resources. AdVAPI 32.dll functionality additional to the kernel. Includes functions for the Windows registry and shutdown and restart functions. GDI 32.dll and GDI.exe, graphic device interface. User 32.dll and user.exe, GUI implementation. Ktl.dll and Ktl32.dll, common controls, user interface. DML.dll, dynamic data exchange management library. DML provides an interface that simplifies the task of adding DDE capability to an application. MSGSRV32.exe acts as a 32-bit message server and will never appear in the Windows disk list. Win.com, responsible for loading the GUI and the Windows portion of the system. Registry and other configuration files. System.that, user.that, contains the Windows registry. MSDOS.system contains some low-level boot settings and resources such as disabling double buffering and the GUI logo. Win.ini and System.ini, configuration files from Windows 3.1, processed in Windows 9 also. Virtual Machine Manager and Configuration Manager. VMM32.vxd, Virtual Machine Manager and default drivers. It takes over from IO.system as kernel. Installable File System Manager. If shop.system enables Windows to make direct file system calls bypassing MS-DOS methods. If smk.vxd, 32-bit driver for the installable file system. ios.vxdi/o supervisor that controls and manages all protected mode file system and block device drivers. mprex.exe, mperserve.dll and mpr.dll, multiple provider router, required for network authentication and user profiles. mspwl32.dll password list management library. Device drivers io.system, executable handling all of the basic functions, such as i/o routines and also serve SS kernel until vmm32.vxd takes over. imm.system, DOS device driver which allows DOS programs to store data in extended memory via the extended memory specification. System.drv, msound.drv, com.drv, vga.drv, mouse.drv, bigmem.drv, keyboard.drv, 16-bit drivers. CP1252.NLS, CP437.NLS, Unicode.NLS, locale.NLS, keyboard layouts. RMM.PDR Real Mode Mapper Virtual Device. The system may also use config.system, which contains settings and commands executed before loading the command interpreter, and autoexec.bat, which is a batch file automatically executed after loading command.com. However, these two files are not critical to the boot process, as io.sys contains a default setting for both, in case of absence from the system. In Windows ME, config.sys and autoexec.bat are not processed and logo.system may be used as a splash screen. Boot sequence. The Windows 9X startup process consists of 6 phases. The first 2 of these steps are common to any operating system booting using the traditional combination of BIOS and master boot record. Phase 1, the ROM BIOS bootstrap process. The ROM BIOS starts the execution at the physical memory address FFFF0H. During this phase, BIOS first executes the power on self-test, then checks for the existence of a boot disk on driver. If it is not found in driver, the ROM BIOS checks for a hard disk. If the computer has a plug-and-play BIOS, in addition, BIOS checks the RAM for I/O port addresses, interrupt lines and DMA channels for plug-and-play devices, disables found devices, creates maps of used and unused resources and re-enables devices. Phase 2, the master boot record and boot sector. The master boot record is loaded at address 7C00H and loads the boot sector of the Windows disk partition. The boot sector contains the disk boot program and BIOS parameter block table which searches for the location of the root directory and io.system file, which then loads the io.system file into memory. Phase 3, io.system file initialization. io.system initializes the minimal file allocation table driver and loads msdos.system into memory. It then displays starting windows depending on the boot delay line in the msdos.system file. It then loads the logo.system file and displays a startup image on the screen. If the dbspace.ini or dbspace.ini file exists, it also loads drivers for compressed disks. Windows then attempts to open the registry file system.that. If that fails, it attempts to open system.the0. If configured in msdos.system or in the registry, double buffering is also enabled. Phase 4, config.system and real mode configuration. Windows 95 to Windows 98 now analyze config.system and load MS-DOS real mode drivers. Windows ME ignores this. If the config.system file does not exist, the io.system file loads the drivers if shop.system, imm.system and setva.exe. Windows reserves all upper memory blocks for Windows 95 operating system use or for expanded memory. Windows 95 to Windows 98 execute command.com to process autoexec.bat. It loads terminate and stay resident programs into memory. Windows ME ignores this step, as real mode DOS support is disabled and TSRs being loaded can compromise system stability. Phase 5, initialize drivers. IO.system now runs Win.com. Win.com loads the vmm32.vxd file into memory or accesses it from the hard disk. This file contains the most important drivers and the 9x kernel. The real mode virtual device driver loader checks for duplicate virtual device drivers that exist both in the Windows /system /vmm32 folder and the vmm32.vxd file. In a case of duplicates, the driver in the Windows /system /vmm32 directory will be loaded. Windows 95 to 98 now query real mode drivers calling in to/fh and search for drivers in registry entry key _local _machine /system /current control set /services /vxd mark II. Be loaded as an external file. VMM32 then analyzes the 386N section of the Windows /system.ini file and loads drivers listed there. Some important drivers are loaded even if they are not listed in the Windows registry, system.ini or in the Windows /system /vmm32 directory. Once the real mode virtual device drivers are loaded, driver initialization on Windows 95 to Windows 98 occurs. VMM32 then switches the CPU from real mode to protected mode. The next step is the initialization of protected mode drivers, executed in 3 phases for each device, a critical part of initialization, while interrupts are disabled. Device initialization, when file I/O is allowed, and init complete phase. After initialization of the display driver, Windows switches to graphical mode. Phase 6, Win32 initialization. Once all of the drivers are loaded, the kernel 32.dll, GDI 32.dll, GDI.exe, user 32.dll, user.exe, shell 32.dll and explorer.exe files are loaded. The next step in the startup process is to load the network environment. User is prompted to log on to the network that is configured. When a user logs on, their desktop settings are loaded from the registry, or the desktop configuration uses a default desktop. Windows then starts programs defined in the startup folder, win.ini, and programs defined in registry keys run once, run services and run services once inside the branch ishkey _local _machine /software /Microsoft /Windows /current version and key _current _user /software /Microsoft /Windows /current version /. After each program in the UNONS registry key is started, the program is removed from the key.kernel. The Windows 9X kernel is a 32-bit kernel with virtual memory. Drivers are provided by .vxd files or since Windows 98, the newer WDM drivers can be used .2. However, the MS-DOS kernel stays resident in memory. Windows will use the old MS-DOS 16-bit drivers if they are installed, except on Windows ME. In Windows ME, DOS is still running, but Windows will ignore any attempt to load its device drivers when passing the autoexec.bat, and will move the environment variables that it still recognizes from the config.system into the Windows registry.c also. Architecture of Windows NT. Microsoft Windows. Caldera v Microsoft. WinGlue. FreeWin.
Good. Let's start the video.